I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glynn,
your Teagasc Sustainability Advisors, and you're welcome to the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast, bringing you the latest information, science and opinion to improve farm sustainability.
Siobhan Kavanagh, Teagasc Communications Specialist with the Signpost Farm programme, and Mick Houlihan, Agri Sustainability Manager with Bord Bia, join us to discuss our carbon footprint and how we can reduce on-farm emissions. We are being asked to significantly reduce carbon emissions over the next few years. But to do this, farmers need to know their baseline emissions.
Did you know many farmers have a Bord Bia report which can be used to track a farm's carbon footprint over time and measure its performance against other farms of a similar size and enterprise, allowing farmers to identify areas for improvement? I started off by asking Siobhan to tell us about the Signpost Farms programme and what it hopes to achieve.
So the Signpost programme is a collaboration led by Teagasc of farmers, industry and state bodies all working together to reduce emissions on Irish farms. And the focus of the programme is on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also on improving water quality and enhancing biodiversity on Irish farms. We're taking very much a holistic approach to this. So there's a lot of talk about environmental sustainability, but this programme will deal with economic, social and environmental all in one. So it's not a case that we want to sort out the environmental issues without also being cognizant of from an economics and a social point of view. So the current target for the programme is to reduce emissions on the Signpost farms, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. Signpost farms by 15% by 2025, and then on all farms by 2030. Now these targets will have to be adjusted, and they will be in the next short while in light of the 22 to 30% target reduction set out in the Climate Action Plan. So for the programme, there's two main elements to it, or three, I suppose you could say. We have a number of Signpost farms dotted right across the country in all the enterprises. So we've about 110 of those at the moment. So all the main enterprises, dairy, beef, sheep, tillage, and then we've organics, we've some pig farmers as well. And the idea is that those farmers will demonstrate the key technologies that we have for reducing emissions. So at the moment, we're very much reliant on the technologies that are in the MAC curve, but there is science coming that will provide us with more technologies. The Signpost farmers will demonstrate best practice and these various different type technologies, whether it be protected urea or LESS or reducing their days at slaughter. That's the first part of it. The second part then is the advisory programme around that. So it's how we engage with farmers, all farmers, because every farmer has a role in terms of reducing emissions, how we engage with farmers to help them to adopt these technologies. So the inspiration, I suppose, will come from the Signpost farmers, but then would there be a whole programme around advisory in terms of helping farmers to deliver that change at farm level. And that's a challenge in itself. And then the third component is the research component. So there's a big research part of the Signpost looking at specifically at carbon sequestration, I suppose. So on those farms, we have flux towers set up to capture information on carbon sequestration. There'll be soil samples taken on all those farms to monitor how we store carbon in soils and how under different management practices on farm we're doing that. And that will be really important. At the moment, land use is separated out from our own targets in agriculture, but back by the time we hit 2030, they probably will be back included. And to have solid information on how we sequester carbon will be really important over the next number of years as we go towards a 50% reduction in 2030 for the whole country and a net zero by 2050. So that's a very quick synopsis, Cathal, of what the programme is about.
Yes, it's massive targets, I suppose, to achieve, and it's actually really interesting to see how this is going to go, because you have over 100 farms looking to adopt best practice and adopt that change onto the farm, heavily supported by research and advisory. So it's great to see it. A question I suppose I could ask you is, how do those kind of farmers feel about being the guinea pigs? Are they excited, nervous, or what's the feeling with them?
No, they're excited and they're very engaged with it. Like, I suppose when we went out to select those farmers, we needed to identify farmers that would be the early adopters. And very often these farmers that we have selected are already on the pathway to reducing their emissions. So they have started using protected urea, they're using the LESS, they're looking at improving their EBI, they're looking at ways to reduce nitrogen, so incorporating clover or experimenting with multi-species forwards. So we would have picked farmers that were enthused about getting involved and demonstrating to others. They're concerned, no more than all farmers are, because the targets are huge. Like, and we can't underestimate the huge challenge that we have ahead of us. But I have to say, the Signpost farmers, and I've met a good few groups of them at this stage, they are enthusiastic and willing to push the boat out in terms of adopting these technologies.
And look, there's no better person than farmer to farmer looking in over the ditch to see how the neighbours getting on before they adopt a new practice. So I think it's very positive. But we speak a lot about carbon footprint, and you mentioned that we're looking to reduce total emissions through the Signpost farms. How important is it for farmers to look at their carbon footprint?
Yeah, so no more than anything that we're trying to measure or we're trying to reduce or improve. You can't manage what you don't measure, okay? And we say that if we're trying to improve your EBI or your breeding performance or your live weight gain over the winter or whatever, if you're not measuring weights or you're not measuring your EBI and checking it, you're never going to improve these things. And it's the same with reducing carbon emissions. So a farmer needs to understand where they're starting from, and that's why we joined up with Bord Bia this autumn to create awareness amongst farmers of the information that they do have available to them on their farm and the emissions on the farms. So Mick will talk a little bit about the carbon footprint in a few minutes, but like, there's over 54,000 farmers have access to the carbon footprint figure for their farms. And that's hugely significant. That's nearly half of our farmers have this information. As a consumer, do I know what the footprint for my household is? I don't know it, but farmers have this information. So we're starting off with a really good starting point by having that information. So the carbon footprint really refers to how much greenhouse gases are emitted from an activity. So that is the production of meat or milk in our place or in our industry, or it could be how much emissions from driving a car or taking a flight. And these emissions are, like, we've three basic gases we're talking about. We're talking about carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide. And they're all expressed as carbon dioxide, just to make it easy to add them all together and to I suppose gauge them one against the other. So the carbon footprint figure is a really good starting point for a farmer to see where they're at today and where they need to get to. It's not the full story, and you mentioned total emissions there a minute ago. We're trying to reduce our total emissions at national level. So that 22 to 30% target is total emissions. The carbon footprint is just the emissions per kilo of milk or per kilo of meat. So it's a good starting point, but a farmer needs to also be conscious that they're trying to reduce their total emissions. So if you're reducing your footprint, but say your milk production goes way up, increases significantly, or the quantity of meat you're producing increases significantly, well, then the chances are you're not going to reduce your total emissions. So you need to look at the total emissions as well as looking at the footprint, but the footprint is a good starting point.
Mick, how is the carbon footprint calculated? What sources of data are required by the farmer to get the baseline emissions for his or her farm?
Okay, thanks, Deirdre. So the carbon footprint is calculated using the Teagasc carbon footprint model. So essentially, it's about 10 years ago now when we brought the carbon footprint model into our Bord Bia database, our Bord Bia quality assurance database, so that we could use the information that we were gathering in the farm audits that we were doing to feed into that calculator that Teagasc had developed. So the carbon footprint calculator, or the carbon footprint model, as we commonly refer to it, developed by Teagasc, taking account of the production systems that predominate in Ireland here, developed in line with international guidelines and a model that's accredited and recognised internationally. It draws on data that we collect in the farm audits, as I said, but it also draws on data that we have access to from other sources. So we get information coming from ICBF in relation to things like weight gain, calving interval, and so on. And then also, very importantly, the information from the AIM system. And that's what really, I suppose, the key driver in terms of helping us to kind of identify animal numbers on farms and look at animal numbers on a monthly basis within the model. So it's a really it's a really complex, I suppose, set of calculations that are happening within the model. There's a huge amount of data that feeds into it, and there's a huge amount that has to kind of happen even to kind of prepare that data to feed into the calculator and get it right. But ultimately, the three sources of data is what's gathered on farm during the quality assurance audits, the AIMS data and the ICBF data. With the dairy farms, we also have information that comes from the dairy processors. So as Siobhan mentioned, the carbon footprint is a measure of the emissions versus the output of the farm. So having that information coming from the dairy processors in relation to the volume of milk, the fat and protein content of that milk as well, is a really important input into the model.
So you've minimised the amount of input then that farmers actually have to contribute to the calculations.
Yeah, exactly. We've tried to just bring it right back to on-farm activity. So capturing information in relation to management practices around the grazing season, so turnout and housing of animals, the different categories of animals on the farm, looking at how slurry is managed on the farm, storage periods, spreading, application, timing of application, how it's applied on the farm, looking at fertilizer use on the farm, looking at concentrate feed used on the farm. They're kind of the main elements, I suppose, that we can't get anywhere else other than directly from the farmer. But we're lucky in Ireland, I suppose, that we have access to very comprehensive and very accurate databases in relation to AIMS and ICBF, and obviously then the milk data on the dairy side as well.
Mick, how often do the farmers have to contribute this information? Is it over, is seasonally, or is it once a year? Or?
So we do the audits in an 18-month cycle. So every time we conduct an audit, a carbon footprint is generated for the farm. So that's something that, again, I suppose that we're looking at trying to change a little bit as well. On an 18-month cycle, it means that you'll have 1 year entry where you don't have any carbon footprint for the farm, and that's something that we'd like to try and get over, where we would have an annual figure available to the farm. So it's important then for farmers that are maybe participating in discussion groups or attending events on farm, that when they hear about the carbon footprint for the farm that they're on, that they can compare like with like. They compare the most up-to-date figure that they have for their farm with the farm that they're on. So we are hoping to open up the sustainability survey that's conducted as part of the Bord Bia audit, that gathers that farm management information to farmers, so that they can complete that on an annual basis. As we said, the access to their databases means that we can just pull in that information and be able to generate the figures on an annual basis.
So once the farmer receives the report, how do they know what's the biggest contributor to the carbon footprint? And I suppose the benchmarking as well, then I suppose that would be useful, within discussion groups and that kind of information. So how do you know, how can the farmer read it, that what's contributing to the footprint?
When the farmer completes the Bord Bia audit and we generate the carbon footprint, we also generate a farm feedback report that gets sent out to the farmer. And within that report, then it's broken down into a number of different sections, and it indicates to them the current performance of the farm based on the calculations coming up of the carbon footprint model, and also based on other information provided in the sustainability survey. And it compares that current performance with their performance from a previous assessment. So they can see the direction of travel for their own farm. And if we look at the emissions specifically, they can see, well, have the emissions gone up or down? Is the carbon footprint increasing or decreasing? And then we also have a benchmark figure in there in terms of how their farm figure compares to farms of a similar size or a similar type to theirs. So a farmer can see whether they're above average or below average in terms of how they perform with their peer group. Also within that report, again, in terms of the emissions, there's an effort to try and kind of demystify things, I suppose, to an extent, and try to highlight to farmers how emissions are generated on their farm or the main sources of emissions on their farm. So there's anyone that's seen the reports might be familiar with a chart, I suppose, that we have in it that kind of breaks down the proportion of emissions that come from the different sources on the farm. So we're looking at emissions associated with the animals themselves and animal digestion. We're looking at emissions associated with slurry and manure management, fertilizer use and feed, and so on as well. So the farmer can start to get a sense of where maybe the opportunities exist to make some changes. So they might identify that, you know, on average, their emissions associated with fertilizer use on the farm are higher than their peer group. So potentially there's an opportunity for them there to do something to come back more in line with the peer group.
So it gives them good area for focus, really, Mick.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Mick, that's my favorite part of the whole thing. I love the idea that you can look at how you're performed the last couple of years and how you're I suppose sizing up to your people in the same size and enterprise, because I don't know what you're like, but I think it brings out the competitive nature in different people that, you know, you see someone around you doing something, you'd like to get that little bit better than them. Well, that's the way I'm set up anyway.
That's only you, Cathal.
But it's a really good point, I suppose, and like the, you know, the conversations that we're having with farmers an awful lot lately are around just that. Well, how do I change? How do I do better? How do I make improvements? Where's the scope for me to do something that gets me in line with the average, or gets me better than where I am, even if they're already in a good position. And again, within the report, we're trying to give some guidance and pointers there. So we would have worked with Teagasc in the development of this report as well. And it's, I suppose, we're not just presenting the details in relation to the figures that are generated as a result of the carbon footprint calculations and the sustainability assessment on farm. So there's a feedback and a guidance piece there that really brings in, I suppose, the advice from Teagasc in terms of what farmers can do and what measures they can implement. So in line with everything that's happening in relation to the Signpost Farm, you know, the measures that are being talked about, being implemented on the Signpost Farm are reflected in that feedback report as well.
And Siobhan, I suppose we're looking at there now, this is information that's available to farmers at the moment. My first question, I'd be wondering how many actually look at the information at the minute, but if they do look at this new way of measuring their performance, do you think they should get some sort of credit for it maybe?
It could be a very loaded question, Cathal. I suppose the way I'd view that is why would farmers bother, or why should farmers be motivated to look at reducing their footprint, apart from the competitive nature of being best in class? Like, a lot of the measures that we're asking farmers to take to reduce their emissions are a win-win for farmers. So they'll reduce emissions on their farm, but they'll also either improve the productivity of the farm, the efficiency, reduce costs, or both. So ultimately their bottom line should be better by reducing their carbon footprint. So that to me should be one of the motivators. It mightn't be an external credit for it, but it's a motivator for the farmers themselves. We all know as an industry that we're very, very dependent on our international markets to sell product, and the ability of the processors to be able to demonstrate to buyers that we have a low carbon footprint is so important for us in terms of securing markets, gaining new markets, and maximizing the returns for farmers. So the bottom line is the price for farmers. So more and more the buyers internationally are looking to Ireland and saying, can you demonstrate that you're reducing your carbon footprint? Because that's becoming more and more of a requirement for them and their consumers. So I think in terms of the efficiency on the farm, I think farmers are gain, but also I think in terms of our markets and the international and the payback to farmers in terms of price and having more markets out there. Like, there will be technologies that are going to cost farmers, that like LESS, for example, or these feed additives. Like, farmers are not going to just voluntarily put those feed additives in to reduce emissions unless it either improves performance, which I don't know whether they do or they don't, but there are a lot of technologies that the farmers will need to be incentivized to reduce that carbon footprint. And really, that's down to industry and to the government to decide where those incentives are going to be put in place to encourage farmers to adopt the technologies to reduce their carbon footprint. And obviously then reducing our carbon footprint is going to feed into the national inventory and help us meet our national and international obligations. So the credit, I think, will come at farm level in terms of improved efficiency, reduced costs and profitability in terms of our markets. And I think there will be incentives will come. We just don't know what they're going to look like, but more and more it's been talked about that they will be a requirement to reduce the footprint and meet our targets.
Yeah, I think you're right, Siobhan. Like there's a lot of the stuff that you're talking about here, be it whatever it is, even reducing calving intervals, maybe minimum age, finishing off animals, all that stuff is going to be benefit to the farm, and it's going to come into the account for you as well. The one thing I'll say, I suppose, is if we have this information here, look, farmers are used to looking at grass measurement figures now, their milk solids, all that stuff, their growth rates. I suppose the big thing now, I suppose, is try and get them to look at this information and identify actions off it. But how will the advice be delivered, Siobhan, or is it up to the farmer? What way will they use this support tool?
I view this as a new KPI for farmers. Like they're used to you looking at the physical and financial KPIs for the farmer, but this is one of the environmental KPIs for farmers to track themselves in terms of the progress they're making. And as Mick has said, they'll get this every 18 months and hopefully more regularly going forward, and then they can benchmark themselves. So it's an important tool when they're sitting down to do a plan for their farm for the next couple of years. What I would say in terms of using it is to pull out that carbon footprint figure. Now, they will get a report every 18 months. Some of them probably don't know where that report is, but it's worth contacting Bord Bia or going onto the website and downloading that. But to get the maximum value out of it, firstly, make sure that the figures that they have in that report are accurate and that it is reflective of their farm. Because if you don't put accurate information, say the information that went in the sustainability survey that Mick spoke about, if that information, as Mick said, if it's not accurate going in, well, then your carbon footprint isn't going to be accurate. So make sure that the information is accurate first and foremost. And then I would encourage a farmer to sit down with his or her advisor and identify where the emissions are coming from or where you are relative to your peers, just like Mick said. So if your nitrogen use looks an awful lot higher than the national average, well, you have to ask yourself the question, why is it an awful lot higher? And does that need to be a focus area? On the animal digestion side, which is where most of our emissions are coming from, what are the things that I can do to reduce methane emissions there? So what's my age at slaughter? What's the calving interval? Am I producing a cow per calf per year? Am I maximising the amount of grass that I'm using? Identify 3 or 4 areas on the report to say, yeah, these are the things that I can go after in 2022. Rather than looking at a whole list of 10 or 15 things they can do, what's the 3 or 4 things they're going to focus on? And what they should really try to focus on is the low-hanging fruit. So the things that are going to give an impact pretty quickly in terms of reducing emissions. So say, for example, EBI. EBI is a slow burner. So if you want to improve your EBI by €10 a year for the next 10 years, there's a bit of a slow burner on that. It does have a big impact on emissions, but it is a slow burner. Whereas starting to use protected urea will give you a win pretty quickly. Like Seamus Carney has done a couple of case studies on this, and going to 100% protected urea will reduce emissions on a typical dairy farm by between 7 and 8%. That's total emissions, so that's very significant. Switching to LESS is a relatively low-hanging fruit as well to move across to. Putting out lime to sort out a soil fertility issue, particularly in light of where we're heading next year with fertilizer prices. So it's to identify 3 or 4 things that a farmer could do next year to reduce his or her emissions. And put a plan in place with the advisor. So rather than looking at this report by yourself, sit down with somebody that can talk through the report with you and identify the couple of areas that you might focus on. And I would strongly recommend that you focus on that low-hanging fruit that will give an impact pretty quickly and that you'll see a response to it.
Look, with such a huge focus on reducing our carbon emissions at the moment, I think we really need to focus on looking at our activities on the farm and look, like you said, implement those positive changes. Siobhan, Mick, thanks a million for the chat today and keep up the good work. And I think we'll have to bring you on for a chat again because we've only touched on what we need to chat. But thanks a million for your chat today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cathal. Thanks, Deirdre.
That's it for this episode of the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast. Thanks to Siobhan Kavanagh, Teagasc Communications Specialist with the Signpost Farm programme, and Mick Houlihan, Agri Sustainability Manager with Bord Bia, for joining us on the show.
Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glynn.
Join us next time for the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast. Signpost to farm sustainability.